Welcome home. We are WNST AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore, and Baltimore Positive. We're taking the Maryland Crab Cave Tour presented by our friends at the Maryland Lottery back out on the road beginning on the 9th of April. That's next Tuesday. The Orioles will be opening things up at Fenway at 2 p.m. that day. We're going to begin in the morning. We're going to be talking a lot about the Key Bridge and a lot about the peninsula and Sparrows Point and now being really trapped. Guess I never really thought about that a whole lot as a kid because the bridge came and now the bridge is gone, and we're going to be talking a lot about the bridge. We're talking some football here a little later on. The Kansas City Royals in town, and then the Orioles go to Pittsburgh here this weekend. Obviously, the weather is clearly a factor. It will not be a factor next Friday on the 12th. We'll be inside at the brand new Fadley's. I wore my Fadley shirt in our previous segment with Luke Jones. We'll be there on Friday from 2 until 5 live. That rhymes. I like that. It's all brought to you by the Maryland Lottery. Liberty Pure Solutions, keeping my water clean, as well as our friends at Jiffy Lube Multi-Care. Luke Jones joins us now. We're going to talk some baseball here, although I don't know from running through the raindrops and the forecast and the rain and the Royals and the rain. And here we go. It's no fooling in April and April Fools that it was lightning and thundering when you and I were doing radio on Monday morning. This is going to be a weird couple of days for pitching, baseball, and getting games in.
Yeah, I mean, we'll have to see how it plays out. I mean, I've looked at the forecast and some periods of rain, but sometimes in the morning, and it looks like it could clear up. I mean, who knows? It's the Chesapeake Bay, right? I mean, if you don't like the weather, wait 10 minutes and see what happens. So we'll see. It's always tricky when it's a team that's coming in for its lone visit, right? I mean, it's a little bit different when you're playing an AL East team early in the year, knowing they're coming back for another series. So we'll see how it plays out. But, I mean, you have a certain number of off days and all of that. But I think beyond just the challenge of the weather and obviously what that can mean for fans and all that, it's challenging for a baseball team early in the season when you're trying to settle into just playing, right? I mean, we look at the first series of the season, Craig Kimbrell kind of waiting to pitch, right? And your Cano warmed up a little bit Saturday. But you haven't had those high leverage situations for the back end of your bullpen, and we've talked a lot about that. Your starting pitchers, you want to keep them. Certainly, you're in a position where early on you're probably taking advantage of off days to give your pitchers an extra day. I don't think you go to a 4-man rotation just because you have off days in April. At least the Orioles aren't approaching it that way. Knowing that they have a long season ahead, but you also don't want guys to be going 6, 7, 8 days in between starts. I mean, that's counterproductive as well. So, you always have that challenge early in the season. The weather's not great. You and I talked briefly in a previous segment about some of the attendance. I mean, it's where you remind yourself, okay, we're finally into April, but these are games that start in late March, and especially considering the climate, it can be brutal in some of these cities. So, you have some of those challenges, but for the Orioles, series win coming off of the first series of 2024, going up against the Kansas City team that in some circles, people think will be better than it's been recently, but certainly not a team that I'm viewing through the lens of being any kind of a serious contender or anything like that. So you want to take advantage, right? We talked about this before the season started, how these first couple weeks look. You want to get off to a good start. I mean, you don't want to be swimming upstream or early on. I mean, you can do it. Yeah, it's a long season and a good start doesn't promise anything either. But, the last thing you want is to get off to the kind of start that, say, the Astros got off to over the weekend against the Yankees as they're swept at home in a 4-game set. So for the Orioles, it's a matter of great start from Burnes, great start from Grayson Rodriguez. Tyler Wells, choppy. Final results didn't look great, but he did set down the last 14 that he faced on Sunday. So he kept them in the game after the rough start. So now it's the same thing for, challenge for Dean Kramer, for Cole Irvin. While we're monitoring John Means and Kyle Bradish rehabbing in Sarasota is, this is where we get to the point in the rotation where, you have a few more questions. You love Corbin Burnes. Grayson Rodriguez kind of looked like a Corbin Burnes impersonation on Saturday night. In fact, he even said that Burnes was talking some trash to him playfully after opening day, saying, "Hey, what are you going to do?" And Grayson Rodriguez, being the competitor that he is, he said, I really love that. That's going to make me better. And you can kind of see that there's some healthy competition with these guys, but
Well, he's a
you
new
got to
guy
go out
too.
and
If they're fishing together, hunting together, doing crosswords
yeah,
together, I covered baseball a long time. That camaraderie and the things that Gibson brought last year as a veteran guy, that all of that changes when you import a one, right? Literally,
right.
you import a one. I saw them import Kevin Brown here 25 years ago and David Wells and Jimmy Key. And some days it worked and some days it didn't. And some days it meshed with Ripken and some days Alomar and Ripken, it didn't mesh. And, like they're factions in a lot of these places, but this has been a real together group. They were all drafted into this. They know one way. You import the best pitcher and, it feels bought in and all that. And he wanted to be in a place like this, but it is different, right? I mean, it is.
Yeah, it's different, and I mean, and especially through the lens of he's in a contract year. Whether he's going to be in Baltimore or wherever he's going to get paid. I mean, he's going to be the top pitcher on the market come this fall. Whether the Orioles pony up and re-sign him, or whether he's pitching for, I don't know, the Yankees next year or the Dodgers next year, because the Dodgers sign everyone. But I mean, it's big for him. Big stakes for him, high stakes for him, and for the Orioles, it's bringing in a pitcher of that magnitude. And I'm glad you brought up Kyle Gibson, because you look at the acquisitions they made in recent years. It was Gibson last year. It was Jordan Lyles before that, who didn't see the competitive success on the field in terms of wins and losses quite as much. But you ask any of those young pitchers in that clubhouse, they'll tell you Lyles was helpful to them. He was someone that certainly shared some lessons and imparted some wisdom
I
in
go back
terms
to
of what it means to
Sutcliffe,
be a
right? With
yeah,
Messina
yeah,
and Ben
exactly.
McDonald, right? And
Absolutely.
Palmer would tell you
Absolutely.
the same thing in the early 60s. And Palmer was that guy for McGregor, for Dennis Martinez, for Scott, for all those guys. And they imported a Steve Stone, right? I mean,
Right.
it's really a mix in every case. Verlander going places and winning and being perceived as that guy. Same thing with Schilling and Randy Johnson, during their careers, moving around and moving into different situations where they can win. That chemistry and that camaraderie is a little different here because of how much base this has. And guys, to your point, I mean, I guess Mullins and Hayes, these guys were around when things were really bad. Coming in and 101 wins, you're the number one starter, you're going to get the ball. No, you're not. I'm going to be the guy chasing you. Messina certainly felt that way about Sutcliffe and McDonald. Messina was always sort of chasing because he wasn't the golden boy, right?
Right. I mean, it really is. You want a mix of that, and I think that's where, look, with analytics and Mike Elias and Sig Mejdal and everything the Orioles are doing from a development standpoint and the technology they use. I mean, if anyone who's been listening to the broadcasts, I mean, talking about now they even have programs and cameras that will actually take the profile of a pitcher. Everything about him is, arm angle, uh, velocity, all those different things, spin rate, and they can basically, allow their hitters to face that guy, so to speak, in a simulated sense to get an idea. I mean, it truly is remarkable, everything they have. That said, there is still a place for chemistry. There's still a place for veteran influences. You can't quantify it. It shouldn't be what drives your decision making, but it's absolutely a part of it. I mean, I can remember a couple years ago when we would kind of say, okay, why Lyles? Last year it was, why Kyle Gibson? I mean, Gibson had pitched for the Phillies, who had been to the World Series, but wasn't great for them, by any stretch of the imagination. But clearly, this baseball operations department, which is so smart and relies on technology and relies on data and player tracking and all those different things, they still recognize the need for positive veteran influence. Again, it's not something that you can quantify and put into a statistic, and put it into a computer and you spit out a number, but that doesn't mean it isn't there. That doesn't mean it isn't part of the equation. So that's where you bring in a Corbin Burnes, who isn't a veteran, the same veteran of a Kyle Gibson in terms of age, but boy, he brings a cachet, he brings a legitimacy to, hey, I better pay attention to this guy. And I get it. He's 29. It's not 38. He's not a grizzled veteran by any means, but he's won the Cy Young. He's pitched in some playoffs, in some big games. He's been arguably the best pitcher in the National League over the last 5 years. So if you're Grayson Rodriguez, there's absolutely a legitimacy there that it brings. And I think one of the all-time best examples, it's not a pitcher, but Palmer to this day talks about Frank Robinson. When the Orioles in the early to mid 60s were on the rise, they had had good teams. They had had close calls. They had had teams that in today's format would have been in the postseason, but they weren't quite there yet. And he said, what about Frank Robinson? He taught us how to win. He came in and everything changed from that moment. The expectation changed from that moment. And I'm not here to suggest that Corbin Burnes is Frank Robinson. I mean, far from it, but he can be the kind of guy that you hope gets Grayson Rodriguez to the next level. I mean, anyone who watched that start on Saturday, Grayson Rodriguez wasn't quite as dominant as Corbin Burnes, but it was really close. It was like 1 and 1A. I mean,
well, I tell you
really
what,
impressive.
I mean, two games into the year, and yeah, they're beating the brains out of the Angels and whatnot.
Right, they stink.
But
right.
Dude, this is what was missing when you had to go play Texas back in October, is dreaming and thinking of that and thinking of what this is going to look like if these guys stay healthy and make 31, 32 start, whatever the number's going to be for them at the end of the year, that they're making their start every 6th day this week if Burnes goes on Wednesday afternoon and we keep the weather together. But that they not just giving them a chance to win, but almost expecting them to win. We talk about gambling and all that. Like every night they'll be a favorite to win with those guys pitching. And they're going to have a chance to win a World Series because of those guys. Now, Henderson, Rutschman, those guys got to play 140 games, get their 600 at bat, like all of that. But and produce, and Holiday needs to come up, and blah 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 blah. The bullpen. We're talking about that all day long. I've talked so much about the bullpen. If these guys are going to go out and give you 6 2/3 every 5th day, and it's going to look like 2-3 run ball, some nights it might look better than that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and look, it's not even a knock where they were last October. I mean, Kyle Bradish could be that guy, and look, I mean, his health is such a big question mark, but I'm just, in general, what they had last year, that can turn into a dynamic. You're mentioning Grayson Rodriguez through a different lens. He's another year older. He went through that experience. He talked about it after Saturday night start. I was sitting there at his locker where he said, I was really eager to get back out on the mound. The last time I was out there was game 2, and the Rangers knocked me around, and that wasn't a good feeling. But he said that really was the driving force for my entire offseason. And some of that is just experience, right? I mean, and it's not like Corbin Burnes hasn't pitched in a World Series, for example. So there's always some unknown, unless you're talking about a Verlander, a Max Scherzer, guys that have done it, guys that have postseason pedigree. But it's not easy. I mean, Clayton Kershaw is one of the greatest pitchers of the last quarter century. First ballot Hall of Famer, slam dunk. What do we remember about Clayton Kershaw in October? It's typically ugly. So it's not easy to do. But the point is, with the experience, with Rodriguez being another year older, the experience of last year, both the successes and the failures of his rookie year, and now you throw Corbin Burnes into the mix, that, now you're not in a position where Grayson Rodriguez has to be the ace. Kyle Bradish, if and hopefully when he comes back, he doesn't have to be the ace. Corbin Burnes is that guy. So everyone else slots down one spot. And I think that just, not that it eliminates the pressure, but I do think it takes some of the pressure off a little bit. But in the meantime, to your point, and I think you really hit on it during the game on social media on Saturday night, it's like Grayson Rodriguez, hey, don't forget about me. I was, the last couple of years, I was considered the best right-handed pitching prospect in baseball. That hasn't changed. And I had a heck of a second half. Just because Corbin Burnes is here doesn't mean that there aren't high expectations for me. But the point is, there's not quite the same spotlight of expectations where, oh my gosh, he has to be the one or they're in trouble. No, now it's a case of, you thought it was going to be, he's the 3 because you had Bradish, but at the very least now it's, go out and be the 2. And Corbin Burnes is going to talk some smack in a playful, friendly, competitive environment. And you pitchers are all going to say, hey, I'm going to try to one up the next guy. I mean, that's what you want. To your point, way back when, it was Rick Sutcliffe setting the bar for Mike Messina and Ben McDonald. And, it comes full circle. And eventually you become that veteran guy. 5 years from now, Grayson Rodriguez is going to be the guy for some pitching, for some 23-year-old the Orioles call up 5 years from now.
And using stuff that Gibson told him last year.
Sure, Gibson and stuff that Corbin Burnes told him this year. So I mean that's how this works. I mean it's you have these full circle moments, right? Cal Ripken was one time the guy that was learning from the other vets in the clubhouse, and then Cal was the guy for so many. Adam Jones now is. He was the young guy back in 08, 9, 10.
Well, I think Nelson Cruz was a great
to the point where they were decent
for them.
Oh, especially for Manny Machado and Jonathan Schoop. Machado would tell you to this day what kind of positive influence Nelson Cruz was for him, Nick Markakis, J.J. Hardy. I mean, those were really those guys. And now look, Manny, people feel a certain way about Manny because some of the
he still threw bats at guys and created fights.
Right. But the point is he's at a different stage in his career where, good or bad, he's influencing younger players in that San Diego clubhouse. So I mean, that's how this works. It sounds corny. I'm not trying to go all Lion King on you, but it's the circle of life. I mean, that's really how this works.
Ray Lewis on the football side, right? Then we talk about the greatest leader we've ever seen. Like and I'll say that to this day, but it wasn't for everybody all the time, but it did develop and change, through the course of time. Yeah. And that would happen here if Rutschman sticks around, because Rutschman's still the guy. He's the dude here. I think it all goes through him.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I don't think it's all him, but it's certainly. For someone who is only in his second full season in the majors, thinking about it like that, I mean, it's definitely, he's a catcher. Catchers, whether they're a rah-rah guy like Rick Dempsey or whether it's a liable guy, they're the ones who are touching the ball. They and the pitcher are touching the ball every single play when they're out on defense. So there's inherently going to be that leadership quality, and that's. It's something that I know, and I'll go back to those traits that you can't quantify when you're Mike Elias and Sig Mejdal in the front office and the analysts, the analytics department. You can't put a number there, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. So I think that's where the Orioles, to their credit, as much as we've talked about, the numbers and player development and all the different things and how scouting has changed. You still do have those intangibles. And I think for the most part, and as we get deeper into this over the next couple of years, time will tell, but I think they've been mindful of that. And that's why there's been some benefit. Look, we've talked about the bullpen, and I haven't talked about the bullpen in the most flattering terms because I do have concerns about the bullpen, but I think Craig Kimbrell is going to be a good influence. Maybe not to the same magnitude of Corbin Burnes with these young starters, but I think Craig Kimbrell will bring, certainly brings a lot of experience. He's pitched in big games. He's not the guy he was with the Red Sox or the guy he was with the Braves years ago. He's he's not going to be Felix Bautista. Even as Mike Elias ran their different projections. Probably the best case scenario for Craig Kimbrell is still not going to be what Felix Bautista was through the first 5 months last year. What Bautista did was historic. He was having that kind of year before he got hurt. But you're hoping what Craig Kimbrell can bring is that positive influence and instilling some confidence in guys and to leadership for the bullpen. And hopefully, still be someone who can get guys out in the ninth inning. That's ultimately what he's really being paid for. But you get those other qualities along the way. So, I think that's what's exciting about this team is that they have the kind of mix that they do, that they're not like the Yankees where, boy, you're just relying on so many veterans. I'm not anti-veterans, but when that's all you have, basically, although certainly Juan Soto's, not an old guy by any stretch of the imagination, but when you're counting on that many guys to stay healthy, that many guys to kind of reverse some recent decline, that's where I think, people who aren't as bullish on the Yankees' chances are pointing to that. So you're the Orioles. My goodness. Okay, Craig Kimbrell's old, by baseball standards. Who else is old on that roster? Even guys that you mentioned Mullins and Hayes and Santander. Those guys are late 20s. They're not 36. So that's where it is interesting for the Orioles coming off of their first postseason experience, albeit a disappointing one where it didn't go well, but it's still a learning experience. And, that's part of what I talked about late in spring training in Sarasota with Austin Hayes. Just, it wasn't some, his thought on it was, it's not like we were, that we did something specifically wrong. We just got beat. That was a team that clearly ended up being pretty good because they won the World Series in the Texas Rangers, but they got beat, and probably was
like running into North Carolina State this week.
Yeah, right. I mean, my goodness. I mean,
right.
You and I didn't watch a whole lot of the beginning of the tournament, but what a story they've
well,
been.
I've
I mean,
watched a whole lot of basketball in my lifetime, and it's the last time North Carolina State did this, I watched it. How about that? Huh?
But it really is an example of, it's all about getting hot at the right time. You and I, we've spent the last 2.5 months talking about the Ravens' loss in the AFC title game, and I've said this somewhat flippantly, but I don't mean it to just be a complete joke. I do wonder at this point for the Ravens if it's going to be that team that is not the best team in the AFC or the best team in the NFL. And maybe there are a few more question marks about them. And maybe they're even a wild card going on the road the entire time. Maybe that's the team that has to break through, that's going to break through for them. So the point is, you can play 6 months of 101 and 61 baseball like the Orioles did this past year, and they were done in 4 days, right? They were eliminated in 4 days.
That. Who's starting game one? I'll always go to that. And when you see Burnes and when you see Rodriguez on, as you pointed out last week, Buck would say, that's what it looks like.
That's what it looks like.
That's what it looks like. Luke Jones is here. I want to go back and say this because I'm promoting our 25th anniversary documentary. I've been putting a lot of time into this last couple of weeks to make it right on behalf of Greg Landry's got his name on it over at Blue Rock Productions, and it was his idea last year. So now I have to sort of follow through and make it good. But I found these pictures that I went to Venezuela in 1986, winter of 86. I just gotten my job at the Baltimore Sun. I'd saved enough money to get to Caracas on American Airlines and Avenza, which I don't know how that plane didn't go down over Angel Falls back in 86 and I perished. But I was in Maracaibo and I went to Luis Aparicio Estadion and I watched Aguilas play and pitch. And I have pictures from that game. The stadium looks a little bit like seeing a game at the old Arlington Stadium. It was one flat sort of aluminum thing in Maracaibo. But the pitcher out on the mound, you can see it up on the scoreboard, Maddux, Greg Maddux. And there's also pictures of me with him on the field in Atlanta with Nagel and Bilecki when they pitched there in the 90s, and Leo Mazzoni, who I made a note, I got to call Leo and get him on. And every time I hear John Smoltz used to do Nasty Nationwide every week. He was like sort of the paid guest. We had a real major league player that would come on every week. It was always John Smoltz. Now he's on. And Glavine was my all-time favorite dude. So I start to see, I measure everything against that. I know around here my dad would say, well, you weren't around for Cuellar and Dobson and McNally. Yeah, I know about all that, but in my era of pitching, and I think of, look, man, I DJ'd Schilling's wedding, right? So in Dundalk. So Schilling moving around from the Phillies to the Diamondbacks to the Red Sox. I was a part of all of that and saw all of that from the inside, and his politics and Hispanic players and Pedro Martinez and him moving around and how all of this Albert Bell clubhouse chemistry, and we talk about all of this stuff. But those Braves guys, they golfed together. They were friends together. They stuck together. There were contracts. There was negotiating with Ted Turner's people. They're on national TV when there was no such a thing on TBS every night. And when I think about what they accomplished there, and I think about what you really need to do to win, right? Like Henderson's nice, Rutschman's nice. But I saw Palmer and McDonald, pitchers, the smart guys, pooping on the Angels. Yeah, they had Ohtani, they had Trout, they have Rendon. They haven't won anything. Name their pitchers during this era. I mean, they had a scandal, they had death, they had drug, they had awful, talk about awful stuff happening in an organization. And they had all of that there, and they haven't won anything. And without pitching, and without that thing, without those couple of guys, I remember when it was going to be Pulsifer and Isringhausen, and I mean, I go through all of these young guns where you have that era, and if Burnes goes out the back door and winds up with the Yankees and comes in here, and you have to face him, and we're going to find out about Rubenstein's ownership. We're going to find out about money, to your point. And for me, and I told the nice man that I met from Mr. Rubenstein's team in regard to, as I stood underneath the Louis Aparicio picture in the Hall of Fame wing of the club level, um, and someone that didn't know a lot about the history of baseball, like all of this, I've been here for all of this, and I'm going to bring all of my wisdom, all the things that Peter hated the most about me and John and TJ Brightman, because I understand the business. I know what they're doing. But they have to do all of this well to be able to afford good pitching. It's not going to be well, he's just a billionaire. He's going to throw a $280 million. No, he's not. He's going to run a business. And the $9 tickets that nobody's buying tonight because it's raining and the Royals are in town and the seats are empty. I say I take it personally every seat that's empty, but they got to get their revenue somehow. And it can't just be from the Coors Light deck in the outfield. And I'm appreciative because I prefer Coors Light. At any price, cold beer at a reasonable price. But the business of this is what's going to finance the pitching of this, and it's what's going to keep guys around because they're all, dude. This is like Lamar in 19 and 20 and 21. They're all cheap right now, and they can't be cheap for more than 10 minutes because once Henderson wins the MVP this year, and if they actually have a parade, they have to keep these guys around. This can't be what the Royals did, where it's one and done, and they were late getting there. I mean, they lived through some lumps that Mullins and maybe Hayes lived through, but 101 wins happen quick here, and the expectations have happened quick here for you and me. The ownership change happened super quick, dude. Peter's death happened
Mm-hmm.
quick. I mean, after sitting around 15 years waiting for Peter to change, die, sell, John to be normal, to run, none of that happened. And then boom, we have new owners. And boom, the team's awesome. And boom, we have like a real pitcher because we have a real baseball development team here. Now, great. How do we become the Cardinals? How does this thing rebuild my city instead of just make a billionaire when he sells it 10 years from now for $4 billion, or his kids do, or Arrighetti gets a hold of it, who I did meet the other day, and well, I'll just leave it at that. But I would just say I'm watching all of this, dude, more than anybody else is watching it in a different way. And I keep thinking, like, these pitchers and Rodriguez and Burnes even saying there's a healthy thing. I don't have a press pass. You do. And apparently if I had one, I'd be getting stop signs and dirty looks and like all that crap that I don't really feel like dealing with because I'm a grown ass man. But I like to see relationships. And I remember what it looked like when Rick Sutcliffe came in and Mike Messina and Ben McDonald were there watching that, and Elrod Hendricks was watching that, and Mike Flanagan was watching that, and Palmer was on the broadcast watching that, and Cal Sr. was in the corner watching that, and Dick Bosman was watching that, and so was Chris Hoyles, and so was Jeff Tackett, who went, and or excuse me, I'm thinking Mark Parent, Bernie Parent, washed up catcher like McCann, came in, catch it, and wound up being a manager for 15, 20 years, because they like great baseball minds. And to your point, like-minded individuals, the growth mindset, people that aren't going to come in and poison the water and be Scott Erickson or Albert Bell and say, why are we playing the Cubans? Let's take the day off. Let's jake it. Let's make everybody look foolish. I was around for that, and Cal couldn't do anything about it, and Cal was a part of it too, and Palmero, and like all of that. Good chemistry matters. It's how you win championships. And I loved reading over the weekend that my tweet in the middle of the game about Rodriguez, that I'm smart enough to know from the outside, having been around it for 22 years with a media pass, that it matters. It matters a lot, that relationship. And that's why I brought up Maddox, and that's why I brought up Smoltz and Avery and Glavin and anybody else that ever got into that mix, that for that period of time, how about this, Buck? That's what it looks like.
Yeah, and look, I mean, it has to be with winning, right? I mean, it's the whole, does winning breed chemistry, or does chemistry breed winning? I think it's a give take. I think that, I really do think it's a two-way street. I think you can have the most influential, good-hearted, willing to help kind of guy in your clubhouse, If he goes out there and gets his brains beat in, I'm not saying they're
He's
going to
not a
tune him
leader.
out from
Hey, maybe we
from
saw
a
that with Doug
friendship.
Trabeck and washed up Cy
Right,
Youngs here for
right.
years.
So,
Right.
so
Yeah.
but I think when you have, and this is where Corbin Burnes is, I look at the progression. Look where Lyles was a couple years ago. Kyle Gibson, I think, was viewed through a lens of 2.0 of that, a little bit improved from, I think they projected slightly better results. I think I don't want to compare guys' character. I think they're different individuals, but I think they were both respected and well liked in that Orioles clubhouse. But now you bring in Burnes, who, okay, he's not the grizzled guy in his mid 30s like Kyle Gibson, who's been around and pitched for different teams and kind of, you know, for lack of a better term, was kind of a journeyman at this point in his career. But he's the guy who's still going to give you veteran influence. But oh yeah, he's going to go out and shove every fifth day too. He's going to go out and be awesome every fifth day and give you a great chance to win. Not a good chance to win, a great chance to win. It's
Hey,
going
man,
to be
Kurt
where
Schilling, half
it's
the
an
room hated Kurt Schilling, but they loved him when he took the ball. Yeah.
it's going to be it's going to be when he pitches, it's an event. Think back over the last 25 years of Orioles baseball, from the end of Mike Messina, so 2000, 24 years. How many pitchers have they had where it felt like an event when they were taking the mound? Eric Bedard for maybe about half a season. Remember, he had that unbelievable year, and that's when the Orioles dealt him then. Dylan Bundy, when he first came up, remember he was, kind of had that 2-month run where it's like, holy cow, this is what we've been hearing about for the last 5 years. It was fleeting, but you saw that. Grayson Rodriguez being called up. Anytime that these young pitching prospects have been called up, it's been exciting. But in terms of every 5 days, week in and week out, for the course of a full season, in Burnes' case, or if Grayson Rodriguez ends up becoming a Cy Young candidate, which I think he can be, if not this year, certainly in the near future, where you flat out say, they're pitching Tuesday. Okay, it's a Grayson Rodriguez day. We're going to say that about Corbin Burnes on Wednesday, weather permitting. It's a Corbin Burnes day. You think about it through the different lens. In the same way you're talking about the Braves pitchers, Pedro Martinez in the late 90s and early 2000s. My goodness, whether you were a Red Sox fan or whether you were just a baseball fan, you knew when Pedro was pitching. You made sure you were watching Sports Center that night because you wanted to see something special potentially.
Luke, man, I have to interrupt you because that was my dad. Like I wrote the book on my dad and released that. My dad in the 70s, we literally would, if Tanana or Ryan were pitching, if Splittorff were pitching, like whoever was pitching for the other team, but also, hey, I want to see Palmer pitch, or I want to see McGregor pitch, or I want to see Flanagan pitch. I want to go out there when Steve Stone's pitching. I want to go out when Fernando's pitching, right? Like, I want to see Ohtani pitch. How about that?
Sure.
We talked bad about him before, but like, that's the thing about seeing Clemens or Ryan or any of these special guys. When you're that guy, hey, how about this? When the Brewers would come to town here for 3 or 4 games in a season, if that never happens anymore because of the National League, we see them once now, right? But if they came in, you would want to pick the game that Burnes pitched, right? Out of their rotation, because I would only go to Philly when Steve Carlton pitched or when Doc Lee pitched.
And look, there's a difference between being a good pitcher and, I'm going to use a wrestling term for you here, because you love every time I start talking wrestling.
Come on.
There is a difference between being a main event talent, meaning you can, especially in this day and age where you've got a pay-per-view month, you've got 5 hours of live, main roster live TV, and I'm just using WWE because it's more popular than AEW. But there is a difference between being a main eventer where you say, yeah, that guy can be in the main event of the show and will do a good job, might even win the title at some point. There is a difference between that and being a true draw, a true attraction, right? I mean, Hulk Hogan, Andre the Giant way back when, attraction, draw, wherever he was going. But the territory system, Andre moved all around, and Vince rented him out, for a lack of a better term. But Andre went all over the world, and he was such a novelty. And obviously his size was the reason why, but you wanted to pay to see him. Hulk Hogan, same way in the mid 80s. Stone Cold Steve Austin and The Rock in the late 90s into the early 2000s. John Cena for about a decade in WWE. Those guys that, there are plenty of other main eventers. There are plenty of other Hall of Famers, but there's that select group where you just say, oh my gosh, I got to stop everything and make sure I'm watching that guy. And look, I'm not comparing Corbin Burnes to Pedro Martinez, like, because Pedro might, for my generation that I really truly remember, peak Pedro kind of feels like that in the most way, in the biggest way, in terms of
One of us lived through Fernando Mania.
Right. But the point is, there are plenty of other great, and Randy Johnson, I would say too. I mean, the big unit was just,
I mean, I lived through
unbelievable.
Fidrich,
You
dude.
just stopped.
You know, I mean, he talked
You
to the
just
baseball.
stopped. Right. But the point is, when you have that guy, and the Orioles have had, I mean, even Mike Messina, and you can speak to this better than I can. I can just speak to it as a fan growing up in my teenage years. He was never appreciated for being as great as he actually was. You know, I would venture to say there were plenty of Orioles fans in the mid to late 90s who didn't even consider Messina a true ace, because by then guys weren't pitching complete games as frequently as Palmer did 20 years before that.
I watched him pitch every night, dude. What do you want to know?
Oh,
I mean,
no, my point. I'm
he
not
would
questioning
tell
the
you
greatness.
that bringing in Wells and Key and starting with Sucker, that he was never until the end out on an island where it was him and Manny Mo and Curley.
Sure.
And Shen.
No, but
you know what I mean?
My point, my point wasn't the performance whatsoever. The perception is what I'm saying. Probably wasn't perceived as highly as he should have been, being as good as he was, because, and everyone deals with this to some degree. The knock on, I remember, God rest their souls, I remember my grandparents. Messina's good. He's no Palmer. And it wasn't in a sense of,
neither was Storm Davis, by the way, so throw him in there.
Right. But and it wasn't in the sense of just ranking Palmer ahead of Messina, because I would still do that. But it was in the sense of being more flippant about it. In the same way today that, these pitchers today, they only go 5 or 6 innings. While we lose the plot point that they're also throwing as hard as they can, and it's a different mentality of how they're pitching. Good or bad, whether you like it or not, it's different. Palmer would even tell you they're trying to throw as hard.
Comparing Lamar to Joe Flacco or Johnny Unitas, right?
Like, yeah, I mean, right. But just to bring it, because I'm going off on a tangent here a little bit, and I understand.
It's okay. It's what we do.
But the point is, with Burnes, and I think Grayson Rodriguez has that potential. It has the potential to really be where it's, hey, when's Burnes pitching? I want to go to the ballpark, or I better make sure I don't have any plans that night. Even if I'm not going to go, I want to be in front of my TV watching him, because he could toss a no. I mean, I'm not saying he's going to.
I felt that way about Messina every night, for sure.
I did too, but it's just, there have been so few pitchers for the Orioles over the last 25 years. And even the ones that I would say, like I mentioned, Bedard, that was for a few months, right? He was that great for a few months where, like, the stuff was like ridiculous. Bundy at the end of his rookie year for the Orioles, where he was, doing some pretty impressive things. But, by and large, they've had good pitchers. It's not as though they've been completely devoid of good starting pitching, but you haven't had those guys where you say, I got to stop everything and make sure I'm watching. Every 5th day, I better watch Burnes. I can't watch all 162, but I sure as heck want to watch Burnes. And they haven't had that kind of an ace.
Well, to your point, even when they were good, they're banging around with Miguel Rodriguez and whatever it is at that point, Wei and Chen, fine, good. But
Hillman.
If they're going to really be good the next couple of years, these guys are going to need to be dudes, because they're at that point in their career, and they're going to need to be paid. That's because they're going to be that good. If they're going to be that good, they're going to warrant that sort of an investment from the team. At the same time, when Henderson, Rutschman, and Holiday are going to warrant that, and that warrants skybox sales, that warrants figuring out the economics of the team, which I'll be here watching the whole time. Luke is Luke at WNST.net. We're going to continue baseball conversation here after games. We'll be in most days. Luke's in the locker room most days. Wasn't on Easter, but we're trying to figure it all out, and the fresh start Orioles, and sort of learn a little bit. We are doing the Maryland Crab Cake Tour on the 9th. We're going to kick it off at Costas, talking about the Key Bridge. We're going to be there during the day. I'm trying. I don't want to say I'm going to start at 11. I think I may start a little earlier based on guests. It's next Tuesday the 9th. Then on the 12th, we will be live from 2 until 5 at Fadley's. Fadley's Fridays. It's all brought to you by the Maryland Lottery. I'll have some Pac-Man giveaways as well as 10 times the cash. Luke will be joining me from 2 until 3 on those Fridays down at Fadley's. Oh, man, the new Fadley's is beautiful. beautiful. And I'm there, and Alicia's like, I want you to set up over here. I'm like, I'll be in the middle of the way. No, it'll look great. It'll be okay, I'm going to set up wherever you tell me to set up. So and I said, do I get the crab cake and a shrimp salad? Yes. Then I'll set up wherever you tell me to set up. So Luke, it's going to be all you can do to not have two of them and an ice cold beer even before you go over and work, because like that setting in that Lexington market's beautiful. So that's next Friday, the 12th. We'll also be there on the 26th. And I promise you, Marcel and I are getting together over at Coco's. I will get the Coco's before the month is over. We're going to do some football. Are we done baseball? Or you got anything else you want to add before I end this thing with you?
I think we covered it for the most part. Good opening series win. Lost on Sunday, disappointing, and yeah, you're back at it, and see the rest of the rotation and see what the bullpen looks like in some close games. We still haven't really seen that just yet, but hey, when your first series of the year, you're off to a perfectly fine, acceptable start.
Talking baseball, Jones and Aparicio. I should do that. We should sing that. I get Eddie Lauer to do that. I am Nestor. He is Luke. We are WNST, AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore. We never stop talking Baltimore. Positive.